including all the background that you have in Asia, and then just coming back into Australia and helping various companies, including various startups, and a startup yourself. Tell us more about your current startup and where you're at the moment.
Yeah. So we've been going for just over 2 years. The business is called Asia Advisory, and we're a digital marketing consultancy helping Aussie businesses predominantly attract clients from Asia. And my background has been in advertising agencies, in media companies, in various roles, throughout Asia. Had a really interesting stint in South Korea that we can touch on as well. But yeah, we're working with all types of clients. Predominantly, it was tourism, education being our major kind of industry sectors. And then over the last 12 months, we've had to radically diverse into other categories and other clients. But we still have some tourism clients that are active and found that they needed to be online to be able to sell their products and services.
As a startup, you've had a 2-year journey now since 2018 that you were talking about. Tell us what's been your journey like as a founder of the startup?
Yeah, I think it was an incredibly either stupid or bold decision to make, to leave a very safe 6-figure income salary, very comfortable senior role within an agency to go and start my own business. And it's been incredibly dynamic. I guess it's kind of like the roller coaster ride that everybody says of highs and lows. That has taken me a little bit of time to get used to, but I think I've proved to myself the incredible amount of resilience to get through some of those lows, and to be launching a business, and then predominantly gravitating towards tourism as an industry because that's where I had the strongest network. And quite deep relationships through Tourism Australia and Destination New South Wales and a few other big sort of government bodies, to then find that that COVID was pretty much wiping out our client base, and they were just sort of sitting there looking around, going, "Well, what are we supposed to do?" It was an incredibly dynamic kind of ride in the last 12 months, particularly, that caused us to kind of look at the business, look at the opportunities, and then basically adapt to be able to survive and to be able to keep growing. And now, 12 months on, we're stronger than we've ever been. So I've been incredibly lucky, and I think it's that determination, that grit, and that willingness to survive. Because I could have easily pulled the plug and said, "No, this is too risky for me. I'm going back to a corporate role." But I decided to stick with it. And the control that I have over my time and the independence and the ability to generate revenue from various sources has been the secret to getting through it.
Since COVID, I mean, you mentioned the last 12 months has been a transformative period as well. And I think the industries has transformed as well in terms of how people think about agencies, how people think about the whole way in which people market. How have you pivoted, and what are some of the things that you're doing unique and that's different, perhaps, to the traditional agency business? Yeah,
sure. Traditional agencies are in a pretty dark place right now. I worked for a company that was part of WPP. It's listed in London. It's the largest advertising and marketing network of businesses in the world. And the particular subset that I worked for, a company called Group M, was responsible for buying 1 in 3 ads that you see anywhere in the world. So very sizable network with blue chip clients, and an industry that was getting heavily disrupted. And a lot of the reasons for that is that the traditional business models and the silos and stuff weren't sustainable anymore. And there's like 3 sort of forces that have come together to cause that. The first is the social media revolution, and we've kind of gone through the information economy where anyone with a credit card can set up an advertising account with one of the big major networks and start buying ads and becoming their own agency. The second thing was the technology availability, so cameras and recording equipment and mobile phones with 4K cameras and studio quality or audio recording meant that you didn't need to pay a creative agency to make a TV ad for you anymore. And then the third area is that the software and the technology that's available would allow you to become a one-man agency, from shooting, editing, publishing a piece of content, posting it online, optimizing it, adjusting it, putting some ad spend behind it, and then post-campaign reporting into this kind of like infinite loop of end-to-end marketing. So, I think it was probably around 2014 when I came back to Australia. I went to an Adobe conference, and they spent a lot of money on marketing themselves in Australia, but with their acquisitions and with the stack of technology that they could build, and they had the credibility because they came from a creative background of, PDFs and Photoshop and Lightroom and all of these creative tools, that you could shoot and edit a piece of content, post it through the platform, tag it, optimize it, put ad spend behind it, and then post report on it, and do the full job that an agency network did as one person with a laptop and a mobile phone. So that really disrupted the ad industry, I think, in a big way, and gave me a lot of confidence that with the right network and the right support around me, including, just our recent connection with AI Films, which is one of your businesses, that we could deliver an end-to-end solution that clients were looking for, and with a remuneration model that was client-friendly, that wasn't necessarily retainer-based, but was based on either a project fee or head hours, or a more flexible way of working that clients were looking for.
I mean, with all the disruption that's taking place, obviously the traditional agencies like your WPPs, your IPGs, etc., that whole industry has internally been trying to pivot. Obviously, most of these agencies have acquired quite significantly. But that said, he also talked about how the blue chip companies as well have transformed in the way they go to market as well. And a lot of the spend, certainly in the last 12 months, have either come down or in addition to that, have gone digital as well.
That's right.
What's your sense of what the market opportunities are for agencies like yourselves?
I think, it goes without saying that digital marketing is the future of where it's at. The fact that you can reach such a wide audience with so much accountability and measurement as well. So like then putting some of the metrics like, return on ad spend or return on investment or any particular metric that you want to pick up, you can monitor and measure with digital. And that wasn't possible, 10 years ago. But now it's so accountable and it's so easy to do. And someone with a little bit of initiative and interest can set themselves up as an agency and can create these campaigns and be fully transparent on the delivery of those campaigns and how that they invoice and work with the client to report on that. It's pretty cool.
So, I mean, given that that's changing quite dramatically, you've got the big boys essentially when it comes to the agencies, and then you've got a lot of micro, fragmented, small, one-man army, as they call it, or one-person shop that's running this. How do you effectively compete with the large established organizations that not only necessarily have the ability to execute at scale, but a lot of the large companies, they often have these supply agreements that are very, very hard to break through. So how have you been able to navigate that complexity?
Well, just to touch on that last bit with the supplier agreements, I think that came back and it bit a lot of agencies in the arse, because they were using those supplier agreements with basically packaging up airtime or packaging up inventory and then getting a rebate on that from the media owner based on a volume purchase kind of model. And clients started to catch up on that. And then there was a really strong wave of procurement that came through the marketing industry around the 2010 to 2012 period. And a lot of agencies got heavily exposed with either getting rebates and using it for themselves or on-selling it onto other clients. Got themselves into a lot of trouble. And had to repay and all sorts of things like, 20 to 30% commissions on multi-million-dollar spends is a lot of money. So yeah, that caught a lot of agencies out, definitely.
In terms of the opportunities as a startup in Sydney, how do you navigate either the blue chip customers or even the mid-sized customers?
Yeah. For me, a lot of it comes down to network. And this is an area we sort of touched on a little bit before we started recording, but I think LinkedIn is probably one of the most powerful marketing tools for me in reconnecting and re-engaging my network where we need to have a conversation or where we're looking for a particular type of client to deliver on a project or an industry focus or something like that. And I found that LinkedIn has been incredibly powerful for reconnecting and, or even expanding that network.
So, I mean, I think LinkedIn, it's not difficult for some of the founders that may be listening in and tuning in to get on LinkedIn and start building a bit of a presence and start to activate their own networks.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between what, let's just say, an amateur would do or somebody not from the background of marketing or agency vis-a-vis some of the things that you do?
Yeah, sure. For me, it was a combination of learning by trial and error and then applying some of the stuff that I'd learned through marketing campaigns. The simple answer for founders that are looking to build their personal brand or to build their network is to sign up for the course that I wrote, and I'm happy to share the links and stuff for that in the descriptions. But I think it's a little bit of a challenge for a number of reasons. Like as founders, we have so many roles to play, but being a founder can be an incredibly lonely place to be because everything comes back to you. It's your network. It's your ability to deliver. It's your previous experience that then enables you to get more clients, to build your reputation, to earn more revenue, to get the business up and running. So I think there's a little bit of a trend of founders that are more successful being ones that have had a very serious and solid background in corporate, and then are able to switch that network from being, I'm Adam and I work for WPP to I'm Adam and I work for Asia Advisory, and this is me, and this is what you get. And it's that background and that experience that brings the quality and the network to that offering. So yeah, that's what's helped me survive. But yeah, the short answer is if you're looking to start a business or you are a startup founder, don't underestimate the power of your personal brand and spend some time looking at that and how you amplify who it is, what you are, who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about. And then you'll be amazed, like without getting too philosophical, so that once you can articulate what you're looking for, it's amazing how the whole universe conspires to help you achieve that. But it's just a case of, and it takes a little bit of work to document that and to say, this is who I am and this is what I want to do and this is why I'm passionate about it. But when you can articulate that and communicate it clearly, then you'd be very surprised at how many people reach out and help you through that process.
Now, obviously, there is plenty of tips and tricks that people can read up on YouTube's. There is probably millions, if not tens of millions of people that'll give you a bit of an advice on how to create a brand and how to become the influencer, etc.
Yeah.
As founders that may be tuning in, that may have that strong ex-corporate background, how do you develop a brand and how do you articulate who you really are that then resonates with, as you said, not Adam from WPP.
Yeah.
Because half the time they're looking at WPP and then you go, well, okay, it just happens that I've got Adam today, right?
That's right.
How do you stand strong without that WPP brand?
Yeah. And that's the tough thing, right? That's the tough thing. When you leave a corporate role and you're out on your own, it could be incredibly lonely because all of a sudden it's not the business card or the network or the name on the wall behind you that's delivering clients. It's you. And that really comes down to, I think, being very authentic and very honest about who you are and what you're doing. So start with the most basic foundation of what your values are, because if you can articulate your values and what you do and don't stand for, then that gives you some guide rails and some parameters about the type of clients that you work with, the type of business practices that you choose to accept or not accept, and the way that you conduct yourself in a professional manner. Because I've had all sorts of clients over the last 2 years, and a lot of them have been short-term project-based, and a few of them have had to unfortunately kind of resign or push to one side because they're not aligned with us and where we're going and our values, and they wanted to operate a specific way, and it could be incredibly draining, and sort of you have to kind of put some of that stuff to one side and say, these are the type of businesses that I choose to work with because they're aligned with our vision and where we're going. And that'll help you, if you can shed all the negative ones, then you can really, really drive forward.
How do you think about, as a startup, and on the hindsight of seeing the agency business being disrupted, and then creating yet another company?
Yeah.
How are you making sure that you don't get disrupted the same way the agencies got disrupted?
Yeah, and that, I think you touched on this before about me being sort of very agile and a smaller team. I was very conscious in the early days that I didn't want to build another agency. I've done that. And in South Korea, I built a team of 75 people in just over a couple of years through mergers and acquisitions and hiring and putting a management team in place and all of the traditional business structure things. But with that comes a certain amount of dead weight, and also you end up a human resources manager, not a business manager, because human resources takes up a lot of the time of management. So on one day you're holding the box of tissues, on the other day you're patting people on the back or rewarding and incentivizing them for their performance. And I didn't want to do that. So the way that I've set Asia Advisory up is a network. So we partner with other agencies and service providers to be able to deliver on a project. So very nimble, very flexible. And there's stuff that we do ourselves, and there's stuff that we outsource, or we do reseller or partnership agreements with other agencies to deliver on that. And we've just finished one of our first campaigns in China for a gin client from the UK that came to me through my network and said, hey, we want to launch a gin brand in Shanghai and Beijing. We want to be live before Christmas. Here's our budget. Can you help us do it? And I went through and I thought, I know exactly the person I want to work through with this, because I've been talking to him for the last 2 years, and now we've finally got a project where we're ready to go. We signed a little bit of a partnership agreement. We're off and running. The campaign was a success. We got a retainer fee out of that. They got a new client, and they broadened their client base, and everybody's happy. The client's happy, we're happy, and this other agency is happy.
It's interesting. One of the things we talked about off air was things like some of the assets they've built as well. There is a lot of intellectual property that you've built, and I know certainly in a lot of the agencies, still very much fee-for-service businesses.
Yeah.
How are you transforming that part of the services industry to a combination of services / assets, which then translates into different types of revenue models? Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time over the last 2 years producing content in all shapes and forms. Initially, I used to write a lot about my startup experiences. So I spent a lot of time in Korea and Shanghai and Beijing, kind of going into the market and looking at it from a founder's perspective to how could I help more founders like myself go into Asia, whether that's China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia. And I used to write about it, and I put it on LinkedIn as published articles. And I did a whole startup incubation program funded by the Korean government in Seoul back in November 2018. And I took photos and I wrote about it and used that as an experience. More recently, I've used video a lot as a way to capture and share information, including a course, including the personal branding course and some other assets. So I found video to be incredibly powerful for conveying messages and building up a wealth of assets. And the course is pretty much a passive income, because once you film it and edit it and post it, and it's sitting on an LMS platform, I don't really need to do anything, because it's there, and it's a passive income for me. And that's just one form of income. And if you look at some of the wealthiest people in the world, the reason they're wealthy is because they diversify their incomes over up to 8 different asset classes or industries or divisions. And I've kind of copied that model and made it work for myself.
What's your ideal long term to be able to retire and have the passive income through various different digital content and media that you've developed
Yeah.
as intellectual property? Do you see that at some point in the very near future, or do you see that kind of taking a bit of time?
As soon as I'm as soon as I'm able to travel again, I'd happily work anywhere with an internet connection and a laptop. So kind of like that digital nomad kind of dream. I'd love to buy a yacht and basically sail north and just keep going. And provided that I had the satellite connection, that's an achievable objective. I don't think I will ever stop working and fully just kick my feet up and retire. It'll always be a combination of lifestyle and work, and passive and active income streams, I think, is the future for me.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Asia. I know you spent quite a while in Asia. We both have spent lots of time in similar cities.
Yeah.
In Asia. There are plenty of opportunities in Asia, but that said, there's also a lot of challenges as well. Some of us had the luxury of having large corporate roles where corporates have had the opportunity to invest for the long game.
Yeah.
I remember going into places like China in the early 2000s, and look, for years, it was just an investment. And these investments were not small by any stretch.
Yeah.
And that's just not including our salaries, right?
That's right. Yeah.
How do founders in early stage companies that are just venturing into some of these emerging markets, and I kind of still call Singapore's and Korea's as emerging market relatively to the rest of the world. What's it like going to some of these markets for some of the Aussie companies that you're talking to at the moment?
Yeah. We're actually working through Haymarket HQ, where we're based. We're working with a few startups and scale-ups to go into Asia, to help them through a 10-week program that helps go step by step to get your business ready for an Asian market entry. And I think a lot of Australian startups and big corporates struggle in Asia because they take a very short-term focus. And to really be successful, you do need to invest for the long term, and that means that you're going to be paying out a lot before you start seeing revenue come in. And that's not just for expats and salaries or for local partners and local talent, but one of my early observations in China when we did a week in Shanghai was where a lot of businesses make a mistake is they go to a trade show, they do some networking. It's usually an affluent male, Western or Australian, going into the market, goes to a networking event, meets someone that's got good English, says, I need someone on the ground. Hey, can you be my local partner? And doesn't do the due diligence on their background, their experience, their network, their skill set, all of that stuff. And then things quickly fall over because you really need to have a local team on the ground of people that you can trust, that have networks and sales ability and government connections and ability to source funding and grants and things like that to get you up and running. And, DFAT and Austrade have a very well-established network of startup hubs throughout the world, including in Shanghai, and I think there's one in Singapore as well. There isn't one in Korea, but there's other avenues to success in Korea. And I think the Australian government is doing everything that they can to try and help Aussie startups to go abroad and go into Asia. But the real secret for me is to have somebody on the ground that you trust and that can, take responsibility and ownership of the business, almost like a co-founder, to help you get up and running.
How do you, when you work with the startup companies or scale-ups, and they often think about what are some of the markets they need to get into? Obviously the US is usually the de facto for many of the tech companies in particular. And then Asia is a bit of an afterthought. Or either an afterthought or sometimes speculative because they might have had an inquiry from someone international and they're thinking, well, okay, I might have traveled to Phuket or I might have traveled to Singapore or any one of those places. But there's a difference between I might have traveled there for a holiday or maybe a couple of trade conferences or I might have traveled there for a couple of meetings and I think I know it. vis-a-vis folks like yourselves and myself. We've been living there for decades. On the ground. With the boots. How do you even try and articulate to people? Gosh, I mean, it's an amazing place. And if you crack through it over the long term, it can be fantastic. But how do you even decide whether you're ready for it?
A lot of businesses, a lot of startups, and a lot of Aussie businesses look straight to China when they think of Asia, and they look at the population and they say, if I could just have 1% of that population, my startup is going to be huge. But unfortunately, that's not an accurate kind of assumption to make. And I would say that going to China is probably the most difficult market you could enter in Asia. And I often sort of suggest people to look at South Korea as an alternative to China because of the level of it's a large stable population of 50 million people based on an American legal system with world-class patents and IP law, and some of the biggest patent holders in the world are Samsung and LG, and Hyundai and Kia, which is another multinational or conglomerate chaebol business. But US is a logical step because of the size of the population and the language ability and the setup support around San Francisco and the startup hubs in Silicon Valley and all that sort of stuff. But if you do look north to Asia, and I think we do need to look north to Asia, and I say this in the broadest context for blue chips as well as startups, because we've only got a population of 25 million people here in Australia. It's only so big you can grow, and you keep hitting the ceiling, and you're like, I can't grow my business any further. Don't necessarily look to China. Look to other markets. Look to tier 2 alternatives that you could still test your market hypothesis, talk to some consumers, get some feedback, and test your products and services. And I'm biased because I fly a Korean flag and I can speak Korean, and I spent a lot of time there, and I have a very warm, passionate feeling for Korea as a culture and as a country. But it's a great alternative to China.
So China can be potentially a first market in Asia, potentially, with the right partnerships, with the right business models, with the right investors, with the right playbook. Korea can be challenging Korea is usually, in my sort of 20-year plus looking into Asia in general, I've always struggled with Korea, relatively speaking. Sometimes it's, at least certainly in corporate, sometimes it's easier to look into China. Even Japan is even harder sometimes in 2020 type, post 2020, I think. When you sort of look at, certain markets that are still growing substantially, there is a lot more hunger into markets like into China, vis-a-vis Japan, where things operate at a very different pace. The rewards can be big, but they operate at very different scales, and they operate at a very different pace. And speed and modalities are very different. It's a very long game.
That's right.
And language is obviously an issue, whereas I think the Australia and China trade relationships, despite I think the recent headwinds, I suppose, there is still nonetheless our largest trading partner at the moment. And then on the other hand, you've got relatively easy markets like Singapore, where language is not an issue.
Entry-level Asia, Asia with training wheels,
well, that's
you want to
it.
call it.
And, whilst the population is significantly, substantially smaller than that of Australia, the GDP is amazing. The dollars per GDP is significant. The number of high net worth individuals per capita is stupendously different. And those markets are relatively easy and well supported by Austrade and
that's right,
and even the state governments as well that have points of presence.
That's right.
But that said, I think sometimes Southeast Asia is a very different market as well, vis-a-vis North Asia, and even within those regional markets, or South Asia, within those regional markets you have countries, and then within countries you have sub-markets. How do you help various different companies that are entering into Asia think about how to even think about the different parts of Asia, because obviously
Yeah.
Korea is a great country, and,
Yeah.
and that's part of North Asia, but a subset of North Asia.
Yeah.
And then you've got Southeast Asia, South Asia, etc. So
Mm.
get the regions right,
Yeah.
and then you have a bit of a plan around the countries, and then start
Yeah.
building a bit of a playbook. Where do you go first?
Yeah.
Where do you go second?
Yeah.
Do you go exclusive to one place? Obviously, it depends on how much budget you have and how much bandwidth you have as management to deal with
Yeah.
these complexities.
Yeah.
But what would be some of the ways to think about some of these big problems?
Yeah. A big initial consideration is where you want to establish your company. So to have an Asian operation, a lot of businesses go to Singapore or Hong Kong for tax reasons, to set up a business structure there, and then to go out from that into the region. So Singapore and Hong Kong tend to be a logical first step because you've got access into regional headquarters. Anybody who's anybody in Asia has a headquarters in Singapore or Hong Kong, and or both. So that, and the very safe legal structure. I just attended an event last week that was put on by the Greater Bay Area and Invest Hong Kong, encouraging people to come back to Hong Kong again as a way to access into China. And it's kind of like a foreign-friendly entry point. Hong Kong is part of China. One country, two systems still operates under the British system of law, which makes it very familiar for Westerners to set up and establish and to have an operation, and then gives you access into Shenzhen, Guangzhou, many people and many cities with a very high-speed rail network, so you don't even have to fly. And you can go from Hong Kong to Guangzhou in 14 minutes, which is incredible. And then you're effectively in China. You're in China when you're in Hong Kong, but you can be in a tech development center, or you can have, and this is what other people do as well, is that they set up operating hubs in different regions. So they may have a management and marketing function in Hong Kong or Singapore, and then they have a development team, or if they're a hardware manufacturer, they'll have development teams in Guangzhou, or one of the other cities in China, and then have things divided up all over the place, depending on the need and the stage of development that they're going through.
What are some of the key things that companies should be thinking about as it starting to think about going to those markets? And one of the things I can think of on top of my head would be things like budgeting. Some of the things in markets like Singapore and Hong Kong, these are not cheap places to do businesses in.
No.
The cost can be stupendous.
That is a big challenge, and it's kind of like, well, how long is a piece of string? Because it's like, you can spend every cent of your budget if you're not careful. And I think the initial stepping stone is to go into one of those landing pads, the Austrade landing pads, because you get 3 months of free rent and connections and networking and all of that stuff that'll help you to kind of suss out the opportunity and to spend some time in the market. But as soon as we're allowed to travel again, there's no substitute for time in market. And whether you're funding that as your own expense or as a holiday or as a learning tour or whatever you want to call it, there's no substitute for time in market. And that's also refundable under the Export Market Development Grant. So we talk when we're talking to clients that are ready to go into Asia, like, hey, by the way, did you know that 50% of your travel, subsistence, accommodation, marketing expenses, including working with consultants like us, is retrospectively paid back through a federal government grant, not just for 1 year, but for 7 consecutive years, starting at a minimum spend of around 15,000 Aussie up to $150,000 a year for 7 years. That's a really strong support backing financially to help you get your startup into Asia, and it's probably a very easy place to access, and provided that you keep receipts and meeting bookings and business cards and stuff like that, then you can claim those funds retrospectively.
So the opportunities in Asia is humongous. I mean, we get that, and companies have done really well. And I've also seen certain companies have had massive scale in markets like India, Indonesia,
Yep.
Where language has not been an issue. They're foreign friendly. and some of the international apps have done well, or
Yeah.
as in tech companies have done
Yeah, yeah.
relatively well
Yeah.
in some of those relatively easy to enter markets.
Mm.
And at the back of that, get massive valuations, and then end up in the US very successfully.
Yeah.
So the opportunities are absolutely massive, but that also comes with challenges and risks. And some companies I've also seen have come back and said, look, the whole Asia journey was a bit of a distraction. I wish they hadn't gone into it. Often probably not because of the strategy was wrong, but perhaps it was execution that was an issue.
Yeah.
But that said, it can hurt companies where they're either going to Asia too early,
Yeah.
or maybe the strategy was wrong, or
Yeah.
even the execution may have failed, or any one of the combination of those. What are some of the challenges that you see that could potentially be avoided?
Yeah. We went through this journey ourselves back in 2019. So I was thinking of taking Asia Advisory into China and South Korea as our kind of next stage of expansion. And we went through a program with Haymarket HQ, which was a 10-week, it was called the China Canvas Challenge. And we were one of 10 final startups that actually went through the full program, did the pitch night with investors, support network, all that sort of stuff, and then did a trip into Shanghai and went to Alibaba headquarters and talked to Austrade and saw the landing pad and talked to the Australia-China Business Council and talked to consultants on the ground and did the whole sort of journey. And I think it was probably around day 2, I was like, I'm not ready for China. Like this is such a wake-up call that it's just too big and it's too complicated. There's too many things that I've got to do. I'm not ready. And I wouldn't have discovered that having not jumped on the plane and gone and done it. So that's a simple way to identify some of the challenges and kind of test whether it's right for you and whether your business is ready for that. And I'm not trying to talk people out of going to Asia, because I think it's probably one of the best things you can do. It's an Australian startup looking to expand your customer base, looking for support with technology and app development, looking for connections to other startups and to other industries. Asia is where it's at, no questions asked. And a lot of startups are leaving the US and locating themselves in either India or China or Hong Kong, Singapore, Southeast Asia, because that's where the future of growth is going to come. And you've got 4.5 billion people across 50 countries, with 2/3 of them going through the evolution of becoming the emerging middle class. That there's an incredible amount of wealth and growth that's happening in that region. And provided that you can understand that and start to tap into it, it's a really unique opportunity for a business to grow very, very quickly. So I'm not trying to talk businesses out of going to Asia, because I see that as the future. And even large Australian blue chips that are listed on the ASX have had various levels of success in Asia. I think if I was to pick one out and say this is the success case study, it would be Macquarie Bank. And Macquarie Bank has been in Asia for more than 20 years, and has deep, strong connections in infrastructure development. In South Korea, they built roads and railways and airports and hotels and various infrastructure, and they have a local foundation, and they have a part Korean, part Australian management team, and have been there for the long term and have invested in time and built those deep relationships. And that literally is the secret to success: is investment, long-term horizon, build strong partnerships and relationships on the ground, no matter which country you go into in Asia. And then on the flip side, I've seen a lot of businesses pull out of China because of the trade tensions that have unfortunately been initiated through the US and been mirrored in Australia, because we sort of follow the lead of the US, whether we like it or not. And a lot of businesses have pulled out of China and said, no, this is not right. There's trade restrictions and we've been blocked, or we've not been able to get resources out or products out and inputs in, vice versa. Look at Peloton, right? So Peloton is a massive startup in the US. They had an epic year in 2020 because of COVID and people working out at home on exercise equipment with the app and videos and all that sort of stuff. They can't get parts and products out of China because of COVID and because of trade restrictions and because of a lack of shipping capacity. And then they can't deliver final products in the US because they can't get the inventory into containers or into trucks or into trains to get to people's houses. So I see the future of that business being very grim. And their share price recently has been reflective of that. So yeah, the challenges are real, and they're well funded, and they're an American startup that has a strong base in Silicon Valley, that has, a combination of product and technology and app kind of integration. So they sit on both sides of the scale, but they're really struggling.
What are the other areas that companies may have perhaps missed of opportunities in Asia? Now, I mean, you talked about the commercialization part of that, but there is also an amazing talent pool in Asia. Talent pool that could be across management, it could be across development, research, etc. Just like Australia, you've got also very strong academic institutions as well.
Yeah.
Like, for example, those in Singapore, for instance, or even in China. With Beijing University, or some of these universities are very well known internationally, globally, on the top few. What are some of the opportunities that you've been able to identify for some of the Aussie companies in the recent years that you think that, oh my God, I wish more people did that?
Yeah, the talent, you touched on a really valuable point there, that the talent in Asia is world class. Whether that's through academia and the universities and the education institutions. Like look at Singapore as a country, like probably some of the best international schools that you could have in the world. And a lot of the big sort of cornerstone universities like Oxford and Cambridge and the US, Harvard, have campuses in Singapore because they can see that that's the future of their growth. So very good education frameworks that train high quality talent in all different shapes and forms. And there's a stereotype around Asia that people from Asia have trouble with creativity because they learn through rote learning, but I'd absolutely refute that in the strongest possible way, because I've seen an incredible amount of creativity come from Asia. Yes, that was the initial approach to R&D in Asia was rip off and duplicate. So look at a Western product like an iPhone and copy it and produce it for cheaper, and that's been their traditional growth path. But that's not the case anymore, because you've got companies like Xiaomi and various other handset technology manufacturers that are now ahead of the game, that have really got Apple up against the ropes. And so, from coming back to the talent question, some of the most amazing leadership teams and creativity and people that I've worked with have come from various markets in Asia. For example, when I was in Korea, we did a lot of our creative development in Taiwan because we had a really good creative team in Taiwan. We had a very sophisticated digital marketing team in India that were very well versed on English and could converse, and potentially were slightly cheaper than working with talent from other markets. In China, we had very, very sophisticated large teams looking after multinationals on their campaigns in China. So there's a huge talent base across the region, and depending on what sort of skill set you look at, Philippines, virtual assistants, Vietnam, technology, manufacturing. Vietnam is such an underestimated market in Asia that a lot of businesses that have pulled out of China for various trade reasons have reinvested that into Vietnam. So 20% of Vietnam's exports now come from Samsung because they've pulled a lot of their after China and Korea had a bit of a disagreement over the THAAD missile. The Koreans pulled a lot of their teams out of China and put them into Vietnam and built infrastructure, and it's a population of 80 million people in Vietnam, and it's growing very, very quickly. So again, another market. As soon as I can jump on a plane, I'll be over there. And then in Indonesia, 300 million people across 17,000 islands. Many challenges, many opportunities, outside of just looking at Jakarta, but across the population of 300 million people. So yeah, every market in Asia is different, but the talent there is world class. And depending on what sort of talent you're looking for, we could help you find it.
One of the things he talked about or touched on was the various different geopolitical points of concerns that may come up. And I think it's important for anybody entering into each of these markets to understand the entire landscape. Obviously, there's only so much one can learn about a specific market, the domestic issues, international issues for each of those markets, and then the various different friction points or things that may or may not necessarily be commonly talked about. So, for example, if you're in Singapore, it's important to understand how other countries are thinking about Singapore, the neighbors are thinking about Singapore, and how Singapore is thinking about its neighbors. They're friends on one hand, but then there are also other ways people are thinking about as well, at a domestic level, but also at the political level. And nonetheless, there are also a wide range of things that kind of that it's always volatile in some cases, and sometimes volatility is not as obvious until you spend a bit of time in the market. The news media, for example, doesn't often talk about things in the same way. The American media, the Australian media talk about these types of things. How much do you feel like companies that are entering into those markets need to understand the geopolitical landscape?
Take some of it with a grain of salt, because the view that we're fed on Asian markets is very skewed. It's very, very narrow. I remember when I first moved to Korea, I think I'd been there for about 2 weeks, and I was in the hotel room and I had CNN on the news, and North Korea fired a couple of missiles over the border and took out a military installation and killed four South Koreans. And I was shitting myself. I was like, I think it's time to get out. Like, I've only just arrived, but maybe this war is about to break out. And I was obviously watching BBC and CNN, getting my news that way, but that's a very filtered view. Talk to a Korean person, it's just another tantrum that the North Koreans are trying to throw their weight around because they need some food, because the sanctions are really starting to kick in. But yeah, there is immense opportunity if you look beyond some of those Western media views in the markets, and we are very distorted in the way that we think about geopolitical risk. Yes, political risk is a factor, but the easy way to get around that is to look at market entry into Asia like building a family. And a lot of the big successful companies in Asia are family-run businesses that take a long-term investment horizon, that look at the future in succession plans of generations rather than quarterly revenue statements and flash reporting on profit and loss. They take a very different perspective on investment and, the long-term kind of outlook for the business. And that's why they are so big and so successful. Take Samsung for an example. It's a chaebol. It's a family-owned business. Yes, it's listed on the stock exchange, but still 40% owned by a family, and the family have deep connections into airlines, chemical manufacturing, industrial shipping, electronics. So we know Samsung as an electronics company, but that's only a very small part of their business. So taking a family perspective will help you get around some of those geopolitical risks.
Awesome. I guess one of the questions I have maybe for our executive production team to see what are some of the questions that are coming in from the social media platform.
So considering the cultural distinction between for example, Australia and China, what are the ethical issues that you might get into while working as a marketing agency in Asia?
Yeah. Ethics in Asia can be a sensitive subject. I've spent some time in China trying to solve an ethical challenge between our client and our agency, and we had to have a mediation session to kind of resolve some challenges. And it was regarding purchasing some outdoor inventory, and the client wanted one thing and the agency recommended another, and there was a conflict, and there were some pretty hectic accusations thrown around that needed to be resolved to repair this relationship. So ethics can be a sensitive subject in Asia. I think if you're very true to your values and you look at, you know, the way that you operate and the way what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, then that will help you navigate through any sort of difficulty, whether it's, you know, an ethical concern or likewise.
Just following up on that, though, one of the biggest gotchas, I think, for companies trying to operate into China or I mean, Asia in general, could be on the subject of bribery and corruption. Obviously, large multinational corporations have been caught out as well. And you know, I won't name names, but I think, you know, it's all in media.
Yeah.
Some have gotten away with, some haven't. And, you know, there is obviously, you know, even from an Australian perspective, you know, we know well-known cases of people that have been accused of situations in China or you know, otherwise in Asia that may or may not have been public yet. So it's a big issue. It's real. As I said, big companies get caught out, and even small companies that may not necessarily have the legal infrastructure or very strong headquarter-oriented legal advisors to put policies and rules of what's allowed and what's not allowed. Because, for example, if you're a US-based company or US headquartered company at some point, or a company with offices in the US, you have to kind of pretty much understand the international rules, not just the US rules.
Yeah, the Sarbanes-Oxley compliance.
All of that.
All that stuff,
Exactly. So, but for young companies that are into Asia, and the scenario you painted right on the onset is you may end up going to a trade conference, meeting that individual that you talked about, you know, that speaks, you know, good English or presents themselves in a certain way that may be more Australian, for example.
Sure.
But they may advise upon things like saying, "Nah, but that's just how it works here."
Yeah. There's let's not underestimate the power of relationship building in Asia. That, you know, quite often as a Western organization, we do contracts first, relationships second. But in many countries in Asia, it's the flip. It's relationship first, contract second, or sometimes no contract at all. And so entertaining, for as loosely as that sounds, the dinners, the drinking, the karaoke, the golf, all of the entertainment and social aspects around there are usually where the deals are done. And if you get invited to the dinner, that's a really good sign. If you get invited to the drinks after the dinner, that's an even better sign. And then if you get invited to the karaoke or the KTV or whatever happens after that, that means that you're pretty much certain that that relationship is going to be a productive one, because it means that they're building trust with you and they're understanding you and they're treating you like a friend and a family member as opposed to a contractual type of relationship. So there is a lot of entertainment that's par for the course in Asia, whether it's done on the golf course or whether it's done in the karaoke room or across, you know, dinner or a banquet or something like that. That is a very, very common way to do business. And I think you've kind of got to roll with it a little bit and talk to your headquarters and talk to your founders and your investors to say, look, we have to stay till the end because we're the ones that have to pick up the bill, and you know, it's a corporate expense, and it could be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 when you go through, you know, the dinner, the drinks, and then the karaoke and everything after that. But that's the cost of doing business. And I remember when I moved to Korea, we had the CMO of the business we were looking for called our headquarters and said, look, whatever expenses Adam puts through, they're legitimate and there's a receipt for that, but that's the cost of doing business here. And so you've got to wear it. So I never had an expense request declined, despite putting through some pretty ugly receipts.
I think expenses, obviously I think expenses are, they're legitimate expenses, and then there are spend compliances. I get that. Companies kind of understand, or it's not that difficult to navigate through spend compliance. And at what point, you know, something is what you do individually, and at what point a spend over a certain amount is considered a bribe. Or could be misconstrued, or is construed as a bribe. Not necessarily by Australian law, but might be the US law.
Sure.
But I guess those are probably some of the relatively easier things to deal with. But I wouldn't be surprised if people have come to you and have said, look, if you gave me X amount, I can make a deal happen for you.
I've seen the flip side of that. I've seen foreigners and expats just completely ruined, like in one night, and relationships, families, budgets. Saw a guy sort of in a very, very bad way, and I said, what happened? And he said, pointed on the table and there was a receipt for $15,000 worth of champagne from the night before, and he was entertaining clients and probably got sucked in. Who knows what happened? I don't know. But yeah, that though bribery can be commonplace, and that kind of, paying for favors or paying for access can be a little bit risky. But I think not the way around that, but the way to be sensitive to that is for it to be payment in kind. So it may be purchasing a dinner or purchasing a round of golf or picking up the round of drinks, because then you're not directly funding an exchange of cash into someone's account, but through a restaurant or a bar or something, you're proving you're developing your relationship, and you're paying for the food and the drinks that you receive.
What about in terms of direct bribery and corruption? I mean, not me saying that. I mean, that's obviously, I've been in situations where, people have come up and provide proposals.
Sure.
And that happens. Sometimes that happens in public sector as well. It's
definitely
not just in private sector. And whether that comes directly or whether that comes through distributors or that comes through partners, that think that that's the only way that deal's going to get done.
Yeah.
How do you help companies navigate these complexities?
Yeah. The most simplest way is to seek local advice. Talk to your network there. Talk to people that have been in the market for a considerable amount of time, and just sort of discuss, is this accepted? Is this common practice? How do I navigate through this and make sure that it's, going to be compliant with what I have to report back in the US or UK, and, reporting, or in Australia for that matter, and then how local business is done, because there's, in any shape of business, in any shape or form of business, whether it's done here, the US, or in Asia, there's always some exchange of value. It doesn't necessarily have to be funds going into someone's bank account to open access to something. It could be post transaction, or it could be post receiving some benefits or some access or something like that. But yeah, I would say the safest way to get around that is to seek some local advice and talk to people that have been in the market for a while.
Yeah, I just know a lot of companies have been caught out because of that, and local advice would say, well, this is a common marketplace, this is how it's done. And then the laws look at it a little differently as well.
Yeah, and it depends on where you're reporting, like, because everybody has a boss, right? If your boss sits locally, it's probably a little bit easier to pass through some of those expenses. If your boss sits in the US or the UK, then there's obviously different compliance things that you have to meet up with there.
So back over to our executive production team. Are there other questions? Maybe one last question before we wrap?
Sure. So how the work on the Asian market changed your vision on how the advertisement?
So how did working?
Sorry, yeah, wrong microphone. How the work on the Asian market changed your vision on the advertising and marketing strategy?
Yeah.
And if yes, would that be possible to integrate it in the other countries?
Yeah. Advertising as an industry across Asia is still very much emerging. It's quite a young industry and very dynamic, and changing very rapidly. The access to platforms and technology across Asia, whether that's, whether it's TikTok or a local platform, Kakao, Line, a local chat or messaging or social media channel, or a Western one, because the Western ones also have a very big presence in Asia. Facebook, one of Facebook's biggest markets in Asia is Indonesia. the advertising industry is very much emerging and evolving very, very quickly. But with a little bit of research, it's a great way to access your customers and to get scale for your marketing investments.
So one final question, Adam. What do you see as the future of Asia advisory?
Yeah, good question. Very big question. We're evolving as we go. The future for us is probably to be bought up by a client that really needs some hectic help going into Asia. And I've almost sold out a couple of times, but I've kind of held firm. But we'll build teams and scale teams based on a client brief, and bring in partners where we need to deliver on that brief specifically. So the future for us is probably to be just as nimble and just as agile as we are now, and possibly located back in a couple of markets in Asia as soon as we're allowed to travel again. The kind of vision for me was to live the endless summer, so half the year in Australia and half the year in either China or South Korea or Vietnam, and being agile.
Awesome. So with that, Adam, thank you so much for being on the show with us. This has been very insightful, and learning a lot about yourself, your business, the industry, but also about Asia, a big market. So with that, Adam, thank you very much. That's it for now.
Thanks for having us, Callum.